你好, this is Litao Chinese. My name is Zheng Tao. I'm your Chinese teacher. Many students ask me, can people who studied simplified characters understand traditional characters? The answer is yes. Basically, they can. There are three main reasons. First, let me give you a very short introduction to the history of Chinese characters. The earliest systematic Chinese writing system we can see now is the Oracle bone script from about 3,500 years ago. After over 1,000 years of development and evolution to 3rd or 4th century AD, the form of Chinese characters finally developed to maturity and has been used ever since. They are generally called as traditional characters. You can see that the forms of Chinese characters have been constantly simplified since ancient times. For example, this is the original form of the character 车, which means vehicle. There are the cover, axle, and the wheels in it. Later, the cover was removed, leaving only the axle and 2 wheels. And finally, only 1 wheel was left. The traditional character 车 is much simplified compared with the earlier ones. Starting from the 1950s, the Chinese government began to simplify some of the traditional characters and implemented them in mainland China. Please note the 2 points. First, only some of the traditional characters were simplified, not all of them. The total number of general standard Chinese characters is about 8,100, of which 2,500 are simplified characters, accounting for around 30%, which means that 70% of the characters still remain as they are and have not been simplified. The second point is that the roughly 2,500 simplified characters were only promoted in mainland China, not in Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, so almost 100% of the characters they use are still traditional characters. Well, in mainland China, about 70% of the characters are the same as those used in Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, and 30% are simplified characters. For example, in our Chinese Character Level 1 course, there are 100 characters in total, only 31 of which are simplified characters, while the rest have not been simplified. Second, most of the conversions between simplified and traditional characters are regular and easy to master. For example, this radical is the simplified form of 金 when it adds a meaning sign in a character. So we only need to know this correspondence to understand almost all the traditional characters with 金. Also, we only need to know that the traditional form of this radical corresponds to 言. The simplified 车 corresponds to the traditional 车, and the simplified 门 corresponds to the traditional 门. Then we'll be able to read their traditional forms very quickly. Third, although in mainland China we have replaced about 2,500 traditional characters with their simplified forms, in many cases we still have access to these traditional characters. For example, in most of our dictionaries, after each simplified character, the corresponding traditional character is listed. We also have the opportunities to see a lot of traditional characters in many historical places. This makes us not completely unfamiliar with the traditional characters that are being replaced. For these three main reasons, it's not difficult for people who studied simplified characters to read traditional ones once they have mastered a certain number of characters. Even if there are a few traditional characters in a text that they don't know, they can guess the right meaning through the context easily, and it doesn't affect their understanding. In fact, it works the other way around. It's not difficult for people who studied traditional characters to understand simplified characters either, and no special training is needed. It's not only true for Chinese people, but also for Chinese learners. Well, that's all for today. See you next time. 再见.